The letter arrived on a grey morning, sealed with dark wax and no return address. Clara Whitby held it between her fingers as she stood by the window of her small flat in Bath. Outside, the drizzle blurred the cobblestones, making the city look like a fading watercolor painting. The handwriting on the envelope was elegant, almost Victorian in style. Inside, a single sheet of thick cream paper bore a message written in looping ink. To Miss Clara Whitby, rightful inheritor of Briar Hollow Cottage, Hawthorn Dell, Wiltshire. Clara frowned. She had never heard of the place. Her father had passed away 2 months earlier, leaving her nothing but a box of old sketchbooks and a watch that had long stopped ticking. There was no mention of a cottage, certainly not one hidden away in Wiltshire. That evening, as the rain continued to fall, curiosity began to outweigh her doubt. She searched the map for Hawthorn Dell and found it marked only faintly, a speck near the edge of a forest. No photos, no listings, no record of anyone living there. 2 days later, Clara packed a small suitcase, her sketchbook, and her father's broken watch. The train journey to Wiltshire was long and quiet. Mist clung to the windows as the landscape grew wilder, rolling hills, crumbling stone fences, and patches of woodland that seemed to whisper as she passed. When she arrived at the village, an elderly man at the small inn handed her an old brass key. "Briar Hollow, is it?" he said, his voice low. "Strange place. Been empty a long while. You sure it's yours?" Clara smiled politely, though unease stirred in her stomach. "That's what the letter said." The man hesitated, then nodded. "Mind you don't stay after dark without lighting the hearth. The house doesn't like the cold." By the time Clara reached the cottage, twilight had fallen. It stood on a small hill overlooking the valley, a lonely, ivy-covered building with windows clouded by dust. The air smelled faintly of salt and damp earth. She unlocked the door. The hinges groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Inside, the air was thick with stillness. Furniture was covered with white sheets, and the only sound came from the ticking of a clock somewhere within, steady and slow, though she could not see where it was. Then she noticed a faint reflection on the far wall. A mirror stood half-covered by a moth-eaten cloth. Its frame was carved with strange curling letters, barely visible beneath layers of dust. Clara reached out to uncover it. For a moment, her reflection wavered, as though something else were standing just behind her. And then, the ticking stopped. The next morning, sunlight crept through the dusty curtains, casting golden stripes across the wooden floor. Clara woke to the faint sound of waves breaking somewhere in the distance. Though the sea was miles away, its presence felt unnervingly close. She explored the cottage slowly, room by room. The kitchen smelled faintly of soot and lavender, and the shelves still held jars of dried herbs long since turned to dust. In the study, books filled with fading ink lined the walls, their spines cracked with age. But the mirror in the hallway drew her attention again and again. Its surface now looked cleaner, though she hadn't touched it. And there, just as she leaned closer, she saw it, handwriting forming faintly across the glass, as though written by an invisible hand. "Can you hear me?" Clara froze. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it echoing in her throat. She stepped back, blinking, but the words vanished the instant she did. She whispered into the empty air, her voice trembling. "Who's there?" Silence answered her. She told herself it was a trick of light, a residue of imagination, yet when night came, she could not resist returning to the mirror. The moonlight poured through the window, glinting off the glass like a pool of liquid silver. And then, slowly, the reflection changed. The room in the mirror was the same, but not quite. The furniture was newer, the curtains were lace, and the walls glowed with candlelight instead of electric bulbs. At the center of it all sat a young woman in a dark green gown, writing with a quill. Clara's breath caught in her chest. The woman looked exactly like her. The woman's head lifted as if she had heard Clara's gasp. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, She dipped her quill and began to write again. A folded piece of parchment slid across the desk toward the mirror, vanishing from the reflection, only to appear on Clara's own table behind her. She spun around. A sheet of thick paper lay there, edges frayed, ink glistening black. The words were written in elegant curls of old-fashioned script. Miss Whitby, if this reaches you, I fear time has broken. There is a fire yet to come. Do not open the cellar door. Clara's hands shook as she read the final line. Because the cellar door, heavy, iron-bound, and locked, was only a few feet away from where she stood. And she could swear she had heard something move beneath it. That night, sleep refused to come. Clara sat by the dying embers of the hearth, staring at the locked cellar door. The fire had burned low, and every crackle of wood sounded too loud in the silence. The letter still lay beside her on the table. She had read it so many times the words seemed carved into her mind. Do not open the cellar door. But warnings had always drawn her more than comfort ever did. Just past midnight, the wind outside began to howl, scraping against the windows like nails. The old clock in the hallway struck 12, its echo stretching long into the dark. Then she heard it. A sound, faint, rhythmic, deliberate. 3 knocks from beneath the floorboards. Clara froze. Her eyes darted to the door. Dust drifted from the hinges as though something had shifted on the other side. She whispered shakily, "Who's there?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then came a low voice, muffled but unmistakably human. Clara. Her name. Spoken from below. The whisper slithered through the cracks, trembling like air itself. She stumbled backwards, clutching the old brass key she had found hanging by the mantelpiece earlier that evening. The shape of it matched the lock on the cellar door. Her heart raced. This is madness, she told herself. It's only the house settling. Old beams, creaking floorboards, nothing more. Yet the voice came again, clearer now, urgent, pleading. Help me. I'm still here. Clara's breath hitched. The words were followed by another sound, the scrape of something heavy being dragged across stone. She pressed her palm against the door, feeling a faint vibration beneath her fingers. And then, the mirror in the hallway began to hum. A faint glow rippled across its surface, like moonlight on moving water. She turned, heart pounding, and saw movement in the glass. The other Clara, the one in the dark green gown, stood in the reflection again. But this time, her expression was filled with terror. She was pointing directly at the cellar door, shaking her head in warning. Her mouth formed silent words that Clara couldn't hear, until the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through the walls, the floor, and inside her own skull. He's not what he seems. Do not let him out. The brass key slipped from Clara's trembling hand, landing with a sharp clang on the stone floor. The whisper from below turned into a desperate knocking, fast, violent, furious. And just as she backed away, the fire behind her went out, plunging the room into darkness. Then, through the pitch black, came the final whisper. You opened it once before. Morning came pale and silent. The storm had passed, but the house felt heavier, as though the walls themselves remembered the night before. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, the mirror's reflection still haunting her thoughts. She couldn't explain what she had seen, nor could she forget the way the other woman, her mirror self, had looked at her. It wasn't just fear. It was recognition. By noon, curiosity overcame the tremor in her chest. She lit the hearth and carried her sketchbook into the hallway. If the mirror could show her something once, perhaps it could again. The glass was dull at first, reflecting only the quiet room behind her. Then, slowly, like mist parting over water, the scene changed. The woman in the green gown stood by the same window Clara had cleaned the day before. Outside, the world looked older, the trees fuller, the furniture untouched by time. Clara could almost smell the faint sweetness of beeswax and burning candles. The woman turned, and for the first time, she spoke aloud. Her voice was soft, echoing faintly through the glass. You came back. Clara's pulse quickened. Who are you? She asked. The woman smiled faintly. Once, I was you. Once, you were me. The words made no sense, yet they carried the weight of something deeply true. The woman lifted her hand and traced something invisible across the air. Symbols glowed briefly on her side of the mirror, letters, curling and sharp like those carved into the frame. Clara copied them into her sketchbook, though she didn't understand their meaning. The woman's expression grew urgent. You broke the vow, she said, voice trembling. The cellar is not meant to be opened again. I didn't open it, Clara whispered. I swear I didn't. The reflection flickered, like a flame about to die. Then it will try to make you. It always does. What will? Before the answer came, the image began to ripple violently. The woman reached forward, pressing her palm to the glass, her eyes wide with terror. Hide the key, Clara. He remembers. The glass shattered, not outward, but inward, like the mirror had inhaled. The shards melted into darkness, swallowing the reflection whole. Clara stumbled back, gasping, the air around her suddenly colder. When she looked down, a small sliver of mirror had landed near her feet. Its surface still shimmered faintly. In it, for just a heartbeat, she saw not her own reflection, but a man's pale face, eyes open, staring up from beneath the floorboards. Clara barely slept that night. Every sound in the house felt alive, the creak of the rafters, the sigh of the wind through the chimney, even the slow, steady tick of the clock that had begun again though she had unwound it. By dawn, the fog had thickened, rolling across the fields like smoke. The cottage seemed smaller now, as if the air itself pressed against it. Clara sat before the fire, staring at the sliver of mirror she had found. Its surface shimmered faintly whenever she whispered the name that haunted her thoughts. Who was he? Determined to understand, she searched the study again. Beneath the layers of dust and forgotten ledgers, she found an old family register bound in cracked leather. The pages were yellowed, the ink almost gone, but one name had been written over and over in the margins, growing darker each time. Edric Vale. She read it aloud, and a cold gust swept through the room, extinguishing the candle beside her. Somewhere deep within the floor, a plank groaned. Her father had never spoken of ancestors, never mentioned the Vale family, and yet her mother's maiden name had been the same, Vale. A chill crept down her spine. In the margins of the book, beneath the repeated name, was a line scrawled in a desperate hand. He was sealed below to save the bloodline. Never awaken him. Clara's pulse raced. She turned another page and found a sketch, one that looked eerily like the mirror itself, surrounded by strange symbols identical to those she had copied into her sketchbook. Beneath it, in faded ink, was a short note. The mirror binds the past. The vow binds the blood. She closed the book slowly, feeling the weight of the words settle in her chest. It was then she heard the sound again, soft footsteps overhead. But the upper floor of the cottage had been empty since she arrived. The footsteps moved toward the stairwell. Clara rose, heart pounding, the register clutched tightly to her chest. Who's there? She called. Silence. Then a voice, faint but unmistakable, floated down from the landing. It's only me. It was her own voice. She looked up. At the top of the stairs, her reflection stood, her exact likeness, but pale, eyes darkened like smoke. In her hand, the other Clara held the brass key. And she was smiling. Clara froze, her breath catching as the other version of herself descended one step at a time. Each movement was deliberate, echoing faintly through the still air. The firelight flickered, casting both of their shadows upon the wall, one warm and human, the other stretched and distorted, like smoke taking form. Who are you? Clara whispered, her voice trembling. The reflection tilted her head, that same eerie smile never fading. You already know, she said softly. You brought me back when you spoke his name. Clara's hands shook. That's not possible. The other Clara laughed, a sound that made the window panes shiver. You think you're the first veil to open the mirror's bond? You think the bloodline ends with you? With a trembling step forward, Clara demanded, what do you want from me? The reflection's eyes glowed faintly, the brass key glinting between her pale fingers. To finish what you began. He waits beneath this house, bound by your ancestors' oath. Only the true heir can unseal the door. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. Edric Vale, she murmured. The reflection's smile widened. Say it again. A cold pressure filled the room, as if the air thickened with unseen weight. The hearth roared suddenly, the flames rising higher, painting the ceiling with twisting shadows. Clara stumbled back, clutching the register to her chest. You're not real, she said, but even she didn't believe it anymore. The reflection's tone softened. Do you want to know why your mother never spoke of this place? Why she made your father swear never to return? Clara hesitated. Tell me. The reflection leaned forward, whispering like the wind through a graveyard. Because she knew the price of breaking the vow. Every veil must choose, seal the mirror, or awaken what sleeps below. The air crackled. The reflection reached out a trembling hand, pressing the brass key against her palm. It burned like ice. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the reflection shattered, her image fragmenting like broken glass, scattering into the air with a rush of cold wind. The cottage fell silent once more. Clara looked down. The key lay heavy in her hand, its surface still cold. She turned toward the cellar door. For the first time, it no longer looked locked. The cellar door creaked open, releasing a breath of stale, icy air that brushed against Clara's skin. She stood at the top of the narrow staircase, her lantern trembling in her grip. Dust motes danced in the dim light as she descended, step by step, into the dark. The air grew colder. The smell of damp earth and old stone filled her lungs. At the bottom, she found herself in a small chamber lined with crumbling walls. Wooden beams groaned softly above her, and water dripped somewhere in the distance. She swept her lantern across the space, and froze. There, carved into the wall, was the same symbol that had circled the mirror upstairs. Beneath it, a heavy iron door stood half buried in soil, its surface engraved with the words, by blood and vow. Clara knelt before it, running her fingers over the carving. The brass key in her pocket pulsed faintly, warm to the touch. Her reflection's voice echoed faintly in her memory, only the true heir can unseal the door. Her hand shook as she fitted the key into the lock. It turned easily, as though the door had been waiting. The hinges moaned, releasing a breath of cold that extinguished the lantern flame. In the darkness, Clara could hear a faint whisper, familiar, pleading. Clara, do not open it. She froze. The voice was her mother's. Her pulse quickened. Mum. But no answer came. Only the sound of something moving beyond the door, slow, deliberate, scraping against stone. Her instincts screamed for her to run, yet something deeper urged her forward. She pushed the door open. The smell of old smoke and iron rushed out. Inside was a narrow corridor leading to a circular chamber, lit by a single candle burning in the center. On the wall hung portraits, faces of her ancestors, painted centuries apart. At the center of the room stood a figure in tattered clothing, his face hidden beneath shadows. Clara Vale, he said softly, his voice rich and hollow, echoing as though from a great distance. At last, the line continues. Clara's throat tightened. Who are you? The man stepped forward, the candlelight revealing eyes of pale grey. I am Edric Vale. Your ancestor. The one who sealed the pact. Clara took a step back. You're supposed to be dead. He smiled faintly. Death is a small price to pay for eternity. But the bond weakens with each generation. His gaze fell upon her trembling hands. You hold the key. You can renew the oath, or end it. The ground shuddered beneath them, dust falling from the ceiling. Somewhere above, the cottage groaned as if alive. Clara's mind spun. If I renew it, what happens? Edric's expression darkened. The house remains standing. The Vale bloodline endures. But you will never leave Hawthorn Dell. And if I refuse? His eyes burned faintly. Then the mirror will shatter, and what it holds will be free. The air thickened with a sound like whispering wind, voices rising in anger, grief, and longing. Clara's heart pounded as the candle flickered violently. Behind her, the iron door began to close on its own. Clara's voice broke. What did you lock inside this place? Edric's gaze lifted slowly toward the ceiling. Ourselves. The door slammed shut with a thunderous clang, sealing them in darkness. Darkness pressed against Clara from all sides. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, something alive. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the faint candlelight, revealing Edric standing just a few feet away. His pale eyes seemed to pierce through her very thoughts. You must choose, he said quietly. Renew the vow, or break it forever. Clara swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed to run, but running meant leaving the past and the bloodline unresolved. She looked around the chamber, portraits of ancestors, each staring back at her with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The air seemed to hum, as if the house itself awaited her decision. What happens if I break it? She asked. Edric's gaze darkened. The mirror will shatter, and everything bound by the vow will awaken. You may survive, but nothing in Hawthorn Dell will ever be the same. Her heart raced. She thought of the woman in the green gown, her reflection in the mirror, and the whispered warning of her mother. And then she remembered the letter, the words carved into the sliver of mirror, the warnings repeated across generations. Clara reached for the brass key. Its surface was icy cold, but she could feel the weight of her family's legacy pressing into her palm. Her fingers trembled, hovering over the lock. Do it, Clara, Edric said softly. Prove you are the heir. Her mind flashed with visions, fire consuming the chamber, shadows reaching out from the mirror, whispers of ancestors crying in anguish. She could feel the pull of the bloodline, the echo of every Vale who had ever lived. Then, in a moment of clarity, she understood. The choice was never truly about fear or duty, it was about control. She could decide what to carry forward, and what to leave behind. With a deep breath, Clara turned the key in the lock, but not fully. The door creaked open just enough to release a small gust of air. She stepped back, letting it close again, sealing the past without surrendering herself entirely. Edric's eyes widened, and for a moment, his form shimmered, fading like mist. His voice, barely audible, whispered, "The line continues." The candle flickered and died, leaving Clara in darkness. Her hand still clutched the key, warm and solid, a symbol of her own choice. Slowly, she stood, feeling the weight of the house settle behind her. Hawthorn Dell was silent, as if holding its breath. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the misty fields, painting the world in soft gold. Clara knew she had survived. She had faced the bloodline, the mirror, and the legacy beneath the floorboards, and she had chosen for herself. The house waited in quiet reverence, the echoes of the past folded safely into shadows. And for the first time since she arrived, Clara stepped forward, free from the chains of generations, yet bound to the courage that had seen her through the night.